So welcome back to our Israeli-style Shabbat. And let's talk about a few important things. I am going to talk about our portion this week. It's a very important portion. And as I've been doing for the last few weeks, we're going to teach. In other words, as I've said, I'm not going to talk politics. We're going to talk about values from which you can derive your own decisions about what you do in your political life and who you choose to vote for and what you choose to fight for. But let's talk about the origin story. That way we know the why, not just the what. I'm kind of struck by the fact that two churches in the city have recently been the sources of outbreaks for COVID-19. And when you read the report of what has to happen in order for them to reopen, well, it's no surprise. People have to wear masks, there has to be social distancing, there can be no touching, there can be no engaging, they have to institute various protocols, and so on. Which means they didn't. Or maybe they did, but not enough. Or maybe they did almost enough, but just not exactly enough. And that's what happened. So, of course, we worry about what happens when you reopen and you have many different people coming who, throughout the pandemic, have chosen their own rules. There are people who still shake hands. There are people who think that it's okay to hug strangers. It's okay, maybe, because you don't have symptoms. Wrong. There are people who have been extremely careful. There are people who are extremely careful, but they allow people into their homes who visit many homes. It's too hard to tell you what to do. That ship has sailed. It's not me that has to tell you. This is health department and government and so on. But what I'm saying is, when it comes to managing synagogue life, how do we know who's coming and what rules will be in play? So the only thing we can do really is make very strict rules and have absolute adherence. But can you imagine coming to shul and being asked to leave because you're not following the rules? Like, it's hard. Can you imagine coming to shul and feeling isolated, having to cover your face with a mask while in shul? I'm very pleased that we began our reopening of our shul with bar and bat mitzvah yesterday for Jesse and Julia. It was beautiful. It was fantastic. But it was very strange. They read the Torah. It was a beautiful Torah reading. Beautiful Dvar Torah. Families were all here. Not too many people, but everyone that was important to them was here or on a live broadcast just like this. It did feel really strange not to be able to shake a hand, stand next to a bar and bat mitzvah and encourage them, give directions directly, quietly, as opposed to sort of talking into a camera and saying, hey, do this, do this. It's not the easiest thing to do. It's not how we want it. But it's important that life carries on, and we have events, and we have B'nai Mitzvah celebrations, and that young people are given a chance to prove that what matters most to them is accomplishing what they've set out to do, regardless of the pandemic. And it builds hope, and it builds optimism, and it builds courage, and it builds resilience. That's why we do it. And everybody was incredibly compliant. Everyone did exactly what they were asked to do. They wore their masks, they sat in their seat, they came on time, and they left on time. It was beautiful. But it was difficult, and it was hard. And imagine yesterday we were singing Hine ma tovu manayim, the new way. You know what the old way is? The old way is Hine ma tovu manayim, and the new way is that's the new way. We have to be careful. Now, some people have gotten less and less careful. The numbers are starting to rise. Apparently, this is just the norm. This is the way it's going to be. We're going to back and forth. We have kids going back to school, flu season, lots of drama happening in COVID world. But I'm focused on what happens in the space here and how we could make it happen. So the good news is we've begun reopening. We haven't reopened Shabbat services. We'll have discussions about that. We'll figure out what to do. We'll figure out if it's possible. We'll figure out if it makes sense. We'll figure out who's going to come. We've heard reports from shuls, big shuls, way bigger than our shul, opening, and they get 3 people for a minyan. 3 people in person. The rest are on Zoom. We started talking about Sunday morning minyan. I'm not sure that people want to come for Sunday morning minyan, have no food, no socialization, no camaraderie, being distant from each other, davening through a mask, and then going home. But if that's what people want, well, we are now building the capacity to do these things. And of course, this gets to the much larger conversation, what's going to happen on the high holidays? Well, I can tell you, just by way of illustration, my beautiful 7-year-old daughter, Allegra, whose 2 front teeth are going to come in soon, was here for many, many days while we shot, carefully of course, in our studio, a large part of the high holidays. And the stuff that she got to see, it's not that common for a 7-year-old to be able to watch people talk on camera about racism, about mental health. Watch singers of many different types perform their hearts out so that our high holidays will be a stunning, stunning rendition of what we would love to have in person. It's not every day that a little child, 7 years old, who's on her way to being a young adult, gets to watch different people blow shofar, gets to blow a shofar, gets to participate in some of the kids' programming that we're developing and producing. It was a huge group of experiences that she had, and that is because that's what's coming to you. We're about to create a huge, huge and impactful experience, just like we wish we could do in person. We're going to do it on camera. And it takes time and it takes effort, and I'm not afraid to tell you I'm tired. My feet hurt, but it's worth it. Because we are about to prove the most important thing, which is part of what we are saying this year. Shul is a journey, not just a destination. We are on this journey together. The destination sometimes is in the room, it's in the space, and sometimes it's in our hearts and in our homes or in our car. And someone said to me yesterday, one of our members whose son got engaged, you know who you are, and I wish you and your family mazel tov. Her new ritual, Shabbat morning, gets her running shoes on, puts her earphones in, and takes shul with her while she goes for a walk. How fantastic is that? There's nothing to see here. I pretty much look the same every week, beard a little more, beard a little less, but what we talk about every week is different because we're on a journey together. Just imagine, we're in this together on a journey, and while shul sometimes is the destination, sometimes it's your cottage, sometimes it's your car, sometimes it's on rewind, sometimes it's on YouTube, sometimes it's with friends or family, and sometimes you miss it, and it's fine. Ultimately, it's a journey, not a destination. That's what it is for this year. We intend to make the journey exceptional. We're all worried about what happens when you go back to school. We're looking at what happened in France. Out of 45,000 schools, 22 were closed because they started school just a few days ago. Same in Quebec. The numbers are low, but keep an eye on it. And obviously, there's implications for what happens if your kid gets sent home, what if someone has a flu or a cold. Do the research, do the work, and like I said for many weeks now, but especially the last few weeks, grandparents, be careful, because your children and your grandchildren are going to be exposed differently than they were up until now. So please, just be extra cautious. It's hard. It's very hard. It's unimaginable that people have grandchildren they've never seen, who are maybe 6 months old now. It's unimaginable that people are not attending their grandchildren's weddings anymore. I know. My mother told me about someone in Toronto who, prestigious family, who she chose not to travel to the States for her grandson's wedding because she'd probably like to live to see great-grandchildren. Just be careful, please. That's why we're being extra careful at shul. Extra careful. Let's do some learning today. In the reading we had, there are some very important lessons to be learned about Jewish life and our Jewish thinking. How do we think of ourselves as a people, beyond the political, beyond religion? Who are we? What was the source and origin of our identity? Not our history, not the narrative of going from Egypt to the desert to the land, not that. What happened between slavery and freedom? What happened between being a subservient class to being masters of our own future in our own land? What happened? A lot happened more than just a journey. A lot happened in our minds. And a lot of it was new, and a lot of it needed restating and restating. And sure enough, in Deuteronomy, Moses restates many of the teachings of the previous 4 books of the Torah. But here's the first one. We're going to follow the reading for today. So if you want to make a note and go back, it's Deuteronomy 26, chapter 26, beginning with verse 12. And the first thing you find is this fascinating obligation and responsibility, almost like a very personalized ritual. And it tells us then when you finished separating the 10%, the ma'aser, that you have to give to the Levite and the widow and the poor, you take care of them. The Levite depends on you. We've talked many times how the Levites did not get land. They did not get property. They depended on the largesse of the people. We talked partially how that might have been an influence in making sure that they behaved well so that the people were responsive to them. But there's nothing more need to be said about why the orphan and the widow needed part of the tithing. You had to take care of the poor in your society. V'achlu b'sha'arecha, and they will eat that in your gates, meaning you give it to them and they eat it in the city where they are. Then, it doesn't tell us where, but then you have to make a declaration. Biur. Listen to this, is fantastic. You have to make a declaration. You give your charity, you give what is just, you take care of the vulnerable in your society, and then you have to say something. It's not good enough to just do it. You have to say it. Listen to what you say. I have given away the hallowed things, the kodesh, the sacred items from my home that I was storing up. You have to say this. Imagine you're saying this. You close your eyes and you say, I've given away that which was sacred in my house. And I gave it not just to anybody, but I gave it to the Levite, to the orphan, and to the widow. You have to speak those words. And you have to say, just like I fulfill all the commandments that I have, I did not violate your commandments, and I have not forgotten. I did not eat from this food that was meant to go to them by accident, nor while I was in mourning. In other words, I didn't taint it. I didn't do it when I was unclean, and I didn't give it to some other cause. I listened to the voice of my God. I have done everything you've said to me. So you've just finished a declaration in which you have explicitly stated that you follow the commandments. You follow the commandments. You will always follow the commandments. But importantly, lo shachachti, I have not forgotten. This is your personal declaration. And then you go on to say, hashkifa mimon katshecha, look down from your sacred place. Ubarech et amcha Yisrael, and bless your people of Israel and the land that you have given to us, that you swore to give to our ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, what's really important about what we just read here, it cannot be that everybody can say, I fulfilled every commandment. No. It cannot be that you always fulfill all the commandments. But it can be that you treated this sacred food and the sacred tithing properly. And it also can be that lo shachachti, that even if I have not fulfilled all the commandments, I've not forgotten my role as a human being. As a human being, to take care of those who have less than I do in society. Now, what strikes me most about this is that this so rarely happens, where we have to speak our inner thoughts and make a declaration, a personal declaration. Most declarations we make, we sign. Most declarations we make are in our mind or in our heart, but how often do you speak? And this, my friends, is the origin of prayer, in which you have to listen to what you say and hold yourself accountable for your declarations. Because it is easier to declare something in writing or in your heart than it is to speak those words. There's something deeply rooted in listening to yourself and calling yourself out. I listened to your commandments. No, you didn't. You know you don't listen. Yeah, and I don't forget. You're right. I did not forget. So think about that. Even within this entire paragraph, you don't have to be entirely correct, but you're partially correct. I fulfilled the commandment. I took care of people. I did not forget. Now, God, please, bless your people. But what's interesting is we don't say, God, bless me. We use the moment of goodness and this et ratzon, this moment of grace, and we say, not for me, God. I'm imperfect. But as a people, as a nation, of course we're going to be imperfect. How do you have millions of people who are perfect? What are we thinking? And God, your perfection is not the conversation now, but the issue is, we are your people. This is a moment in which we've done a good thing. This would be a good moment to bless us. It's a very, very powerful conversation. It's very much rooted in the human ability or inability to lie to themselves, and whether you can lie to yourselves when you speak your words. Some people can, but most people wouldn't. Most people would have to be much more careful when they spoke these words. But it's important to recognize that even within the declaration, there's wiggle room. Lo shachachti. If a Jewish person can claim to be imperfect but have not forgotten, you're good. You're doing just fine. Just don't forget. Don't believe that in your failure, you truly have failed as a Jew. I hear it over and over and over. People say, Rabbi, I'm not a good Jew. I don't go to shul. I go, that makes you a good Jew? Rabbi, I'm not a good Jew. I fall asleep during sermons. I come only on Yom Kippur. I eat bacon. Hey, my friend, a good Jew is a good person. A traditional Jew does all those other things. An observant Jew does a lot more. But a good Jew, it's about behavior. I care less about what you believe, but I care a lot about how you behave. And I'd say the same for myself. Now, this is not just a random piece of text in the Torah, because it directly connects to everything else that we've read today. And it's so powerful to read how the text of the Torah is not an isolated bunch of chatter, but each thing is really, really creatively connected. Let's go to the next paragraph. Verse 16 in chapter 26. Hayom hazeh, on this day, you have a lot of commandments. And in verse 17, here's again, Et Adonai ha'emarta. To God you have emarta, means emor, you have spoken. To God, you have engaged verbally. Now that you've made your declaration, Moshe says to you, you've made your declaration, well, then you have engaged God with your mouth. You've spoken to God. Maybe there's a voice in return. And it continues, V'Adonai ha'mircha, and God has spoken to you to make you his precious people. To make you above all the other nations for glory, to be sacred, as God has spoken. And that is a very difficult text. It's a very difficult text in which people claim particularism, that we are exclusively God's treasure. And it's a very hard thing, and I don't accept it. I don't actually read it that way. I read it always connected to, if you wish to be a great nation, lishmor kol mitzvotav, you have to follow the commandments and obligations. You cannot expect to be extraordinary without extraordinary obligation and responsibility. You are not special just because you're Jewish. You're special if you act Jewish. We call it living Jewishly. We want you to live it, not just be it. I mean, I've complained for many, many years about people who think that just because of their birthright, they have privilege. It is such a shocking thing to believe. It borders on so much supremacy. And it is a source of so much ill in our society, the idea that people believe because of their birth, they're part of a chain of glory and power and authority, and they're particularly special. Because what? Because your name's Chaim and not Christian? No. You have to earn it. You have to work it. But we do have something which is exceptional, which is we know how to be great. We have an exceptionality, and that is our tradition. Not speaking for anyone else's, but our tradition has given us a roadmap to greatness. We have defined what it means to be great. It's very hard in this life to figure out what greatness is, but we know. We have responsibilities, we have obligations, we have commitments, and most of all, we've spoken and made our promises. Lo shachachti. My promise is, I will do my best not to forget. So this portion comes on the heels of the speaking and the declaration with tithing, and then it continues on into something else that is so extraordinary. You have to hear this to really understand where Jewish identity comes from. In this sort of random piece of conceptuality, Moses comes up with this idea, or I don't know how Moses came up with all his ideas. They're brilliant. But he's about to take all his power and all his authority and all of Jewish power and authority collectively and diminish it and flatten it out. You ready? Here's what he does. He says, in chapter 27, Moses instructs the people and the elders. When you get, in verse 2, when you get across the Jordan River, Moses knows they are going to go into the land without him. So now he's starting to say what happens when you get there. When you get there, Avrachem et Yarden, when you cross the river, I want you to get large monolith stones, very large stones, big stones, and cover them with lime, seed, v'sadita otam basid, like a whitewash. Reminds me of the Huckleberry Finn whitewashing the fence. You're whitewashing the fence. You whitewash the stones. So whatever color they are, they're now white. And then you go and v'chatavta alehem, and you write on them et kol divrei haTorah azot. Every word that I have spoken, you put for public viewing. You put it for public viewing so that every single person, man, woman, and child, knows exactly what was said. And that's all that was said. And everybody has access to it. And it's an open source project. And everyone knows it. And nobody can claim there's more or there's less. It is there. And it probably lasted quite a while once they built it. And people were able to come and write things down or copy it or memorize it. And everybody knew what was in and what was not. And you could not come along and fake it. You could not come along and make up your own text. But this is how Moses diminished the power of the individual leader and said, you will never again be able to make up text. No one else will be able to come along and say, yeah, this, that, God told me. It's not in there. This gave power to every person in society to see what was in the book, to know what's in the book, and they actually didn't even have books. This is the first time they had it in writing. So if you think of the Jewish persona, we didn't get books when we got a printing press. The Torah was written already 3,000 years ago when they crossed the Jordan River. The first thing they did was they posted the entire text on the internet, right there for everybody to see. That is an extraordinary thing. And immediately on the heels of that, once the text was written, one of the most powerful scenes, greater than almost anything imaginable, certainly would qualify as Hollywood epic blockbuster films. You think of this scenario. Moses instructs the Levites and the Kohanim and the people, and he says, we're all going to go now to the bowl being Mount Gerizim, Mount Eval, and the valley in the middle. And on the sides of the mountain, we're going to split the people. On Mount Gerizim, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Issachar, Yosef, and Binyamin will stand on the blessing mountain. And on Mount Eval, we're going to have the curse. Who's going to stand there? Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, and Naphtali. And what's about to happen? The Levites in the middle, down in the bowl. And there was first a blessing recited. Now remember, this is epic. You have 500,000 people here, 500,000 people, even if it was less, 200,000, 200,000. 5,000, 10,000 in the middle. Maybe it was at dusk, maybe at dawn, maybe middle of the night, I don't know. But just imagine the magnitude of this story. And while the text quotes only the curses, our tradition teaches that first the blessing was spoken. So the first blessing curse would have been, blessed is the man who will not make idols, handmade to subvert the will of God, to deflect people away from getting on with living life as opposed to focusing on the obsession with God. V'anu v'amru amen. And everybody answered amen. But the Levites spoke the blessing, and then they said, cursed is the person who makes idols. And they repeated the exact same blessing, first in positive form and then in negative form. And the second one, cursed is the person who strikes their parents secretly. And this goes on and on and on. Things about stealing from individuals quietly. Cursed is the person who moves the stone marker on their property a foot so they gain more of their neighbor's property. And it goes on to sexual crimes, incest, bestiality, all these things. And you wonder, why are these things being spoken of in this format? Why is it in this dramatic moment with half the Israelites on one side and half on the other and the Levites in the middle and this echo of cursed, amen? Just imagine the sound and the fury of what happened there. And there's an opportunity to speak. And instead of talking about kosher, wearing a tallis, what to say in your prayers, what kind of hat to wear, instead of all the issues around religiosity, again, Moses chooses to reframe his entire success in conveying God's will to the people in these terms, following the way Hertz reads it. The first one, idolatry. Second, dishonoring parents. The third is removal of landmarks, meaning stealing property. The fourth is not being humane to the blind. Fifth, injustice to the helpless. 6 to 9, incest and immorality. 10, murder. 12, bribery and other offenses. Every single one of these are sins that are likely to be committed privately. This was about the private life of people. Belief is private, behavior is public, and even when behavior is private, it's part of the collective discourse. And Moses doubles down on behavior. It's not good enough to behave well in public. What goes on behind closed doors is really important. Blessed are those who are good behind closed doors, and cursed are those who are behind closed doors, because most of these crimes could never be prosecuted. There's no evidence that you moved the marker. Maybe the wind blew it, but you claimed part of my property. You're stealing from me. I don't know. There's no evidence. There's no evidence about what went on in the bedrooms of the nation. There's nobody's there. Who's going to tell? Who's going to tell what their father did to them? Who's going to tell who abused who? Who's going to tell? What are you going to do? You're going to go to court? You're going to out yourself? You're going to shame yourself? There's no witnesses. You're going to become a disgrace. No one will ever marry you. And this goes on and on and on, and it's happening today. But Judaism was not so obsessed with your public worldview as it was with your inner environment. And they took the time, Moses' last days, to create this drama so that they could publicly declare a curse on those who misbehave privately, not just publicly. Extraordinarily focused on internal behavior. It's not a surprise, because this whole chapter we've been talking about is about verbalizing the things we don't talk about. Of course, we all know these behaviors are wrong. But now in our history, our ancestors went to the side of a mountain and didn't just hear God speak. That's one narrative, but people don't remember this narrative in which we spoke. The people spoke to themselves, witnessed by each other, half and half. We said out loud the things that people are ashamed to say, which is, there are bad people among us. Cursed may they be. And among us meant among everyone that was there. But they spoke it, just like we do on Yom Kippur. We come to synagogue and we speak bad behaviors. Maybe not ours, but we speak about them. Because speaking is one of the deep features of Jewish identity. Speaking and allowing ourselves to convey truths and listening to ourselves in defining what is right and what is wrong. And that is why today's portion is incredibly powerful. If you get a chance to read it, you should. It's chapter 26, 12 through 27, and it goes on through 27, 6. But I am going to use a little bit of license and conclude with a verse that happens in next year's Torah reading, and that would be chapter 27, verse 13. Moses, in promising good things that will happen if the people are good, says, Unatanacha Adonai l'rosh v'lo l'zanav, and God will make you the head and not the tail. Fairly generic statement, but one that is very important as Rosh Hashanah arrives. One of the primary features of Rosh Hashanah is blessings that we use objects, food, or other objects to highlight our hopes for the year to come. And one of the hopes we highlight is dipping an apple in the honey, say, Shetachadesh Aleinu Shana Tova Umetuka. We should have a good, healthy, sweet year. That's symbolic of our hope. We also have a tradition, I don't know if you do, my mother does, my parents do, many people, traditional have it, and that is that they have a fish head on a plate, and some people actually eat parts of it, which kind of grosses me out, but it's real. And they say, Sheniyeh lerosh v'lo l'zanav, may the year to come be a year in which we are at the head and not at the tail. There are other traditions in which they have a ram's head, a sheep's head, and so on. I'd be very happy if you had a head of lettuce. And then you said, Shenia l'rosh v'lo l'zanav, let us be a head and not a tail. Let the year to come for all of us be one in which we are the head. We are leading by doing the right thing for everybody, leading by being an example for those who wonder whether it's time to leave home or not. Stay home until we're really ready. Don't be the first to try everything. Be the first to do the right things. Do it right. We hope it's a great year. Let this not be the year to come in which the tail wags the head, but rather the head wags the tail. Shana Tova Mituka, a happy, wonderful, blessed, sweet year to everybody. And we very, very, very much look forward to being together even this way on the high holidays. Shana Tova.